There's a strange weight that lives in certain spaces, not because of clutter or poor lighting, but something more subtle. You enter a room and your chest feels heavier. Your thoughts cloud, conversations stall, and without knowing why, you want to leave. Look closer. Perhaps it's a family photo frame tilted just enough to be off balance. A glass cup turned upside down. A broom standing bristles up by the door. Small details easily ignored. But in the language of feng shui and Buddhist symbolism, these are not random. They are energetic statements, and they speak louder than we think. In ancient systems of spatial harmony, form is energy. And when form is reversed, when bowls are flipped, mirrors face downward, or sacred objects are placed without care, it creates a silent disruption in the flow of qi. That energy, once misaligned, seeps into our relationships, our wealth, our sleep, and even our clarity of mind. This isn't superstition, it's structure, it's centuries-old wisdom that sees space as a mirror of self. And what we unconsciously allow in our environment slowly becomes what we invite into our lives. In today's video, we'll uncover the 7 most common objects that, when flipped or misplaced, quietly disturb your home's energetic balance. You'll learn how a simple shift in direction can restore harmony to your family, strengthen your fortune, and protect your mental and emotional well-being. But before we go deeper into this journey, allow me to ask one simple favor. If this message already feels familiar, if some part of you is beginning to question the unseen energies of your home, then please take a moment to help this channel grow. A single like, a quick share, or a subscription to New Day Mindfulness means the world. We're aiming to reach 2,000 subscribers, not for numbers, but to bring these teachings to more people seeking peace, clarity, and grounded prosperity. Your support plants another seed of wisdom in this growing community, because awareness starts small, just like a flipped cup or a misdirected statue, and then ripples outward. Take a breath. Let's begin this quiet but powerful journey of reorientation, of space, of energy, and of the life it reflects. The philosophy behind flipped energy. Why upside down isn't just about objects. In both traditional feng shui and Buddhist metaphysical understanding, space is never inert. It speaks. It shapes us, even when we're not aware of it. Every object you place, every direction it faces, every item you forget to straighten or reorient, all of it contributes to a subtle energetic story unfolding around you. And when those forms are reversed, tilted, or left upside down, the story shifts in ways we don't always recognize, until something in our life starts to feel stuck. A flipped object is more than a minor oversight. In the language of feng shui, it represents a reversal of flow. The orientation of an object determines how qi, or life energy, circulates. A bowl turned upside down no longer receives. A mirror that tilts downward no longer reflects light. It absorbs shadows. A broom bristles up no longer sweeps away bad luck. It traps it. These aren't symbolic superstitions. They're energetic metaphors made physical. And the body, the mind, the fortune of the people living in that space, they feel the difference. Buddhist philosophy adds another layer to this awareness. In the teachings on karma and intention, Ingap, it is said that how you treat the material world reflects how you manage your inner world. Physical gestures hold weight. Misalignment in your surroundings can become a mirror of internal resistance, hesitation in decision-making, confusion in relationships, or even a vague sense of emotional heaviness. Why? Because what is external becomes internal, and vice versa. Our environment is both an expression and an influence of our state of being. When we talk about flipped energy, we're really speaking about distorted signals. The universe and your subconscious responds to what you broadcast. An upside-down sacred object might unintentionally communicate spiritual neglect. A misaligned photo frame might echo disconnection within a family. You don't have to be hyper-vigilant, but you do need to be intentional, because energy is shaped by form, and form is shaped by habit. One of the most overlooked truths in feng shui is that clutter and misplacement aren't just messy, they are decisions deferred, emotions unprocessed, and boundaries blurred. And when those decisions show up in your home as inverted cups, crumpled linens, or sideways mirrors, they slowly translate into a kind of stagnation. Not in one loud event, but in a gradual dimming of clarity, health, and momentum. Correcting this doesn't require expensive items or ritual complexity. Often it starts with something as simple as turning an object upright with presence and respect. That gesture alone realigns more than you think. Because once your space begins to reflect clarity, your life quietly follows. Shall we now move on to the first tangible object, bowls and pot lids, and why their orientation affects more than just storage? The biggest mistakes. Objects you should never leave upside down. Bowls and pot lids. Turning away abundance. In the traditional language of feng shui, few objects carry as much symbolic weight as the bowl and the pot lid. Though humble in form and function, these everyday items are among the most significant emblems of receptivity and protection in the energetic structure of a home. Their placement, orientation, and even their cleanliness are not merely matters of decor or habit. They are direct signals to the universe about how we receive nourishment, how we protect what sustains us, and how open or blocked we are to abundance itself. A bowl by design is meant to hold. It is shaped to receive, to contain, to offer the potential of fulfillment. In classical Chinese metaphysics, the bowl is aligned with the element of earth, representing stability, fertility, and the quiet magnetism that draws resources inward. When a bowl is turned upright, it becomes a vessel ready to welcome the blessings of the world. When it is flipped upside down, either for storage convenience or by oversight, it transforms into a symbol of resistance. It ceases to receive. In the subtle, energetic language of space, it declares, "I am full, I am closed. Nothing more can enter." That gesture, even when unconscious, begins to broadcast an energetic message that can ripple through your household. According to the principles of feng shui, upside-down bowls or lids, especially when placed in prominent locations such as the kitchen, dining area, or the southeast wealth corner, can signal to the universe and to your subconscious that abundance is being rejected or blocked. This is not to say that every bowl must be displayed or revered, but rather that its position should be intentional. When bowls and lids are stored mindlessly, especially in their inverted form, they begin to create pockets of stagnant qi, those invisible currents of life force energy that feng shui seeks to harmonize and direct. Imagine a river running freely until it encounters a rock dam. The water backs up, pools, stagnates. Likewise, the flow of qi in a home with upside-down vessels subtly begins to thicken and slow, particularly in areas tied to finance, nourishment, and emotional fulfillment. The kitchen, in particular, is seen as the heart of abundance in the home. In many Eastern traditions, food is not just sustenance, it is sacred currency. In Buddhist teachings, the bowl is not merely a utensil, it is a symbol of humility and karmic receptivity. A monk does not cook for himself, but receives offerings in his bowl, which he then blesses and consumes with gratitude. The bowl becomes a symbol of trusting the universe to provide. To reject its openness, to turn it upside down, is in a subtle yet powerful way to say, "I do not trust, I do not receive." Over time, that statement becomes internalized. One may find themselves facing unexpected blocks in income, a reduction in generosity from others, or even an inexplicable drop in appetite or joy in cooking. There might be a rise in wastefulness, food going uneaten or spoiling in the refrigerator, or an increased sense of burden around domestic routines. These manifestations may seem disconnected from a mere object's position, but in the energetic framework of feng shui and karmic symbolism, everything is connected. Let us consider the pot lid. It may appear even more trivial, but its symbolism is profound. While the bowl receives, the lid protects. The lid ensures that nourishment is preserved, that heat and essence are retained, and that no external harm, dust, insects, or even ambient energy can contaminate the contents within. A lid turned upside down becomes not a shield, but a vacuum. It no longer protects, it repels. And when stored that way, particularly in the stove area or near food storage zones, it quietly disrupts the protective chi around your sustenance. In modern kitchens, pot lids are often stacked upside down for space efficiency or hidden away in drawers. But from an energetic perspective, this is a kind of unconscious dismissal of the safeguarding principle. The household may then begin to experience forms of energetic leakage, food wastage, unexplained expenses, difficulty preserving wealth, or strained protection around family bonds. For those who are particularly sensitive to energetic shifts, this may even manifest as emotional vulnerability, feeling exposed, unguarded, or unsupported in areas where stability once prevailed. On a subtler level, children or younger members of the household may appear more restless, distracted during meals, or emotionally disconnected. It's as if the home forgets how to hold and protect its own. To restore the energetic function of these objects is not about formality or fear, it is about quiet intention. Start by reviewing where bowls and lids are kept. Are they dusty? Are they upside down? Are they crammed without care into cabinets where nothing feels sacred or deliberate? Take time to clean them. Even if you never use a certain bowl, if it is visible, it participates in the chi field of your space. Place it upright, wipe it with warm water infused with citrus or basil, herbs that energize and cleanse, and silently offer a thought of receptivity. May this vessel attract nourishment. May this home be open to giving and receiving in balance. For pot lids, consider storing them on hooks or horizontal racks where they remain in a resting, but not inverted position. If space is limited, place a paper lining between lids and the cabinet base and turn them right side up whenever possible. The act need not be rigid. What matters is presence. Beyond spatial correction, one can amplify the energetic symbolism by anchoring intention with objects of prosperity. Placing a small money plant near a bowl display or a carved wooden spoon in the southeast sector of your kitchen serves as a visual reminder of open flow. In Buddhist homes, some people place a miniature image of the medicine Buddha or the Bodhisattva of abundance, such as Vasudhara, near the cooking area, not for worship, but to remind themselves that food is healing, and the ability to receive it with gratitude is a sacred gift. Modern life often encourages efficiency over symbolism. But when we move too fast to notice how we place the very tools that feed and protect us, we begin to drift from the subtle disciplines that nurture well-being. These traditions don't ask for rigid adherence. They ask for awareness. A bowl placed mindfully becomes more than a utensil. It becomes a quiet prayer for sufficiency. A pot lid, stored with intention, becomes a soft declaration of protection. When these objects stand upright, they call upon the invisible structure that holds your life together, one meal, one act of care, one thoughtful choice at a time. And sometimes the path to greater fortune begins not with a new income stream, but with the simple act of turning a bowl right side up. Shall I proceed with the next object? Brooms and mops. Be brooms and mops, sweeping away prosperity. In the realm of feng shui, few everyday objects are as misunderstood or underestimated as brooms and mops. While they serve a purely functional purpose in modern households, removing dirt, wiping spills, and maintaining cleanliness, their symbolic significance goes much deeper, rooted in centuries of energetic understanding. These are not just tools of hygiene, they are extensions of energy management, particularly within the domestic sphere. In traditional feng shui, a broom is more than a stick with bristles. It is an energetic sweeper, a boundary setter, a remover of stagnant and chaotic qi. Just as dust accumulates in corners, so does misfortune when energy is not routinely cleared. The broom's sweeping motion mirrors the act of clearing the old to make space for the new, of removing blockages so that life can move more freely. But just as a broom can release and refresh, it can also retain and congest, depending entirely on how it is stored. The position and treatment of a broom or mop after it has done its task are far more consequential than most people realize. When you store a broom with its bristles upright, it becomes a kind of energetic sponge. Instead of discharging the misfortune it has swept away, it holds it. It traps the stagnant qi within its bristles, which then rises upward and spreads into the surrounding area, most often near entrances, corners, or behind doorways where these tools are commonly left. This may seem exaggerated to a modern mind conditioned to separate the practical from the symbolic, but this view is echoed across cultures and centuries. In rural Chinese households, it is considered highly inauspicious to leave a broom leaning with its brush toward the ceiling or in a visible corner of the living room. In ancient Vietnam, sweeping at night was believed to chase away fortune, while in Thailand, housekeepers are often trained to never lean a broom bristle up near a shrine or sleeping area. These practices, far from being arbitrary superstitions, arise from generations of lived experience in environments where energy, though invisible, was treated as tangible and causative. When cleaning tools are not treated properly, their energetic residue becomes part of your household field. Over time, this can manifest in subtle but persistent forms. Financial luck that seems to leak, unexplainable fatigue that lingers even after rest, tension in relationships that escalates over small matters, or an unsettling feeling that something is just off, no matter how clean the house appears. These symptoms are not created by the broom itself, of course, but by the unconscious patterns of disregard it represents. A household that stores its cleansing tools carelessly often reflects a family that hasn't developed healthy boundaries around what they're willing to let go of, emotionally, financially, or spiritually. The mop, often kept wet or half-dried in a forgotten corner, presents its own concerns. Water, in feng shui, is wealth. Dirty water that sits stagnant in a mop bucket symbolizes financial stagnation and emotional suppression. It turns the symbol of flow into a metaphor for energetic decay. When mops are stored bristles up, especially with lingering moisture, they do more than create a breeding ground for bacteria. They create an energetic signature of unresolved emotional residue. The damp mop doesn't just smell, it signals something in the home is festering beneath the surface. When you enter a home where brooms and mops are properly cared for, you feel it. The air feels lighter. The space feels clearer. There's a quiet order even if the house isn't perfectly neat. This is because cleaning tools, when stored with care and intention, continue their energetic task even while not in use. A broom stored with bristles down, preferably behind a closed door or in a covered closet, rests in a passive state. It signals completion. It rests like a sleeping guardian, rather than an unresolved emitter of what it was supposed to clear. In some traditional homes, the broom is even wrapped in red ribbon after heavy cleaning rituals, not just for protection, but to seal its energetic aperture. In Buddhist monastic culture, cleaning is a sacred act. Monks are assigned sweeping tasks not because of hierarchy, but because Sweeping the temple is symbolic of sweeping the mind. The action is a meditation on non-attachment and humility. However, even in these disciplined environments, the way a broom is placed after use matters. A broom never leans against the Buddha image. It is never placed near altars or meditation seats. Why? Because residual energy, even when unseen, is acknowledged and respected. In modern practice, you don't need ceremonial ribbons or incense to elevate this act. You simply need to become more intentional. When your cleaning tools have finished their purpose, don't treat them as afterthoughts. Store brooms bristles down in a hidden spot, behind the laundry room door, inside a utility closet, or tucked away in a non-prominent space that doesn't intersect with your home's vital energy lines, such as entrances, bedrooms, or wealth sectors. Mops should be wrung thoroughly and allowed to dry in open air, not sealed wet in enclosed cabinets. This prevents not only mildew, but energetic stagnation. Once dried, they too should be stored with the mop head down or horizontal, never upright, dripping, or leaning in a visible corner. Consider designating a small area in your home for energy reset tools. This could include your broom, mop, a sage bundle, a bottle of saltwater spray, and a soft cloth for wiping down altar spaces or doorknobs. In doing so, you're creating a new association with these tools, not just as items of necessity, but as sacred extensions of your intention to keep your environment energetically healthy. The goal is not to obsess over placement, but to honor the unseen. Because in feng shui, respect for form becomes respect for flow. And when respect guides even the way you store a broom, it quietly extends to the way you protect your finances, your relationships, and your clarity of mind. A well-treated cleaning tool holds more than fibers and detergent. It holds the silent agreement between you and your home that what no longer serves will be released, fully and respectfully. And when your environment agrees to that contract, prosperity doesn't need to be summoned. It stays. See? Mirrors, misdirecting light and energy. Among all the objects in a home that influence energy flow, mirrors hold one of the most potent and underestimated roles. Their function seems simple, to reflect. But in feng shui, mirrors do not merely reflect our physical image. They redirect, magnify, and in some cases, scatter the very qi that sustains a space. How they are placed, which direction they face, and how they are treated can significantly affect the mental clarity, emotional state, and energetic balance of those living in the home. In Buddhist and metaphysical traditions, a mirror represents both perception and illusion. It reflects truth, but it can also distort. It reveals, but it does not possess. Because it has no essence of its own, it becomes a powerful amplifier of whatever it captures, both good and bad. That is why in temples and monasteries, mirrors are used rarely and always with intention, often shielded when not in use. They are not placed haphazardly, and they are never allowed to face sacred images, meditation seats, or areas meant for deep internal work. In the home, the principle is the same. A mirror must be upright, clean, and purposeful. Its surface must be free of streaks, not only for visual clarity, but to ensure that the energy it reflects is not fragmented. But perhaps most importantly, a mirror must never face downward. When a mirror is installed in such a way that it reflects the ground or is angled toward the floor, it begins to absorb more yin energy than it should. In feng shui, yin is the energy of stillness, rest, and depth. But in excess, yin becomes heaviness, stagnation, and emotional inertia. A downward-facing mirror draws in and anchors this heavier qi. Over time, it may create a subtle blanket of dullness that blankets a room, particularly if the mirror is large or located in a high-impact area like a living room, bedroom, or main hallway. People may begin to feel tired more often, less motivated to act, or even mildly depressed without any clear cause. Clarity becomes elusive. Thoughts circle without resolution. Sleep may come, but without restfulness. Fatigue, both physical and emotional, becomes the quiet soundtrack of a space whose mirrors are misaligned. More than once, feng shui practitioners have observed that correcting a downward-angled mirror in a client's home led to noticeable improvements in energy, reduced arguments, improved sleep, even financial breakthroughs. This is not magical thinking. It is the practical outcome of removing an energetic sink from the environment. Mirrors that face downward stop performing their function as energetic enhancers. Instead of reflecting light and movement, they anchor energy to the floor, sometimes literally pulling positive momentum down with it. There's also a psychological impact. Think of what a mirror angled down suggests. It directs focus toward the lowest possible point, the ground. In symbolic terms, it encourages the gaze, and therefore the mind, to stay close to heaviness, worry, and uncertainty. It doesn't lift, it drags. A mirror that reflects the ceiling or horizon, on the other hand, encourages openness, elevation, possibility. Placement matters. In bedrooms, mirrors should be kept to a minimum and never placed where they reflect the bed directly. The bedroom is a yin space by design, meant for restoration, stillness, and intimacy. A mirror in this space, particularly if misdirected, can disrupt sleep, amplify anxieties, or invite emotional tension between couples. Mirrors near doors must also be considered carefully. When placed directly facing an entrance, a mirror reflects incoming qi right back out the door, symbolically sending away opportunities and support before they can enter. But when placed to the side, angled to reflect pleasant imagery, such as a plant, artwork, or peaceful view, a mirror expands space, softens flow, and invites generosity. The quality of what a mirror reflects becomes part of what the home broadcasts. A mirror reflecting clutter, an empty trash bin, or a blank wall repeats those visual messages endlessly. But a mirror that reflects sunlight, greenery, or symbols of vitality begins to loop that frequency back into the room, creating a ripple effect of uplifted energy. Cleaning your mirrors regularly with intention, not just with glass cleaner, but as an energetic reset, amplifies this effect. A cloth dipped in salt water, citrus-infused spray, or even herbal teas like sage or mint can energetically cleanse the mirror surface. Wipe it clockwise and mentally affirm, "May what is reflected here be clear, kind, and full of light." For downward-facing mirrors, the solution is always elevation and redirection. Tilt the mirror upright. If it cannot be adjusted, consider removing it. If that's not possible, drape a thin piece of light-colored cloth over it during inactive hours. Light-colored fabric softens harshness and prevents further energetic pulling. In spaces where you want to encourage joy, movement, and clarity, such as creative workspaces, dining rooms, or entryways, a well-placed upright mirror can be transformative. It opens a room, doubles the abundance you choose to reflect, and magnifies gratitude, beauty, and social warmth. The idea is not to fear mirrors, but to use them wisely. As with all powerful tools, their impact depends on direction, clarity, and purpose. In spiritual terms, a mirror always tells the truth, but the way it is angled determines what truth it tells. One famous example often cited by feng shui consultants is that of the late fashion icon Coco Chanel. Her Paris apartment famously contained ornate mirrors that were placed strategically, not to reflect her image, but to expand light, bounce beauty, and preserve the elegance of the space. These mirrors, always upright, reflected chandeliers, golden decor, and fresh flower arrangements. She was said to have been deeply sensitive to her surroundings and refused to sit facing a mirror during meals, claiming it distracted her energy. Her intuitive awareness aligned with classical spatial principles. Mirrors should serve the room, not dominate it. In modern design culture, mirrors are often chosen for size and style without consideration for energy. But in feng shui, every reflective surface is a conduit. And when that conduit faces down, it becomes a mirror, not of possibility, but of weight. Imagine trying to move forward while gazing downward. Every step becomes heavier, slower, less intentional. That is the energetic result of mirrors used improperly. The fix is simple but powerful. Upright positioning, clear surface, meaningful reflection. A mirror that reflects the scale of a healthy plant or a piece of meaningful artwork becomes a partner in uplifting your space. A mirror that faces the floor, the trash bin, or sits in a cluttered hallway becomes a silent partner in energetic decline. To realign the energy in your home, start with one mirror. Ask yourself, what is it reflecting? Is it serving the space? Is it returning light or holding darkness? Then adjust accordingly. Because once you begin to shift the mirrors in your home, you often begin to shift the lens through which you see your life. And that is when true clarity begins. D. Buddha or wealth god statues. Misalignment or misfortune. In both feng shui and Buddhist metaphysics, the presence of statues, especially of revered figures like the Buddha or the wealth god, is never considered ornamental. These are not decorative objects to be treated with aesthetic convenience or indifference. They are conduits, silent yet powerful antennas for spiritual resonance, energetic alignment, and protective influence. Their placement, posture, and orientation within a space carry profound symbolic weight and energetic consequence. Misalign one, and you distort not just form but function. Tilt one unintentionally, and you may unknowingly shift the energetic stability of your entire home. This is not superstition, it is structure. It is the law of alignment echoed through centuries of spiritual observation and energy work. A Buddha statue, for example, is not a souvenir. It is a symbol of enlightenment, equanimity, and compassionate clarity. It does not demand worship, but it does call for reverence. When placed correctly, a Buddha image emits calming, grounding vibrations. It reminds us of stillness, invites mindfulness in space and speech, and serves as a subtle reminder to respond rather than react. When placed incorrectly, slanted, upside down, placed on the floor, or wedged between mundane objects, it no longer functions as an energetic anchor. It becomes an obstruction, not a beacon. In feng shui terms, the spiritual antenna is broken. Energy, instead of circulating in uplifting spirals, begins to collapse inward or scatter outward. This often manifests in subtle ways: difficulty concentrating, disharmony in relationships, financial strain, and a vague but persistent spiritual disconnection that is difficult to name but easy to feel. A home where a spiritual statue is misaligned is often a home where clarity becomes difficult to sustain. The same principles apply to statues of wealth-attracting deities like the god of wealth, Cai Shen Ye, Lakshmi, or even earth-based prosperity symbols like elephants with raised trunks or frogs with coins in their mouths. These figures symbolize focused abundance, material stability, and the flow of blessings. When placed appropriately, facing inward toward the home, never toward the door or window, elevated above waist height, and kept clean, they function as magnets for positive flow. When they are neglected, placed too low, tilted, dusty, or mixed among random clutter, they fail to hold the vibration they are intended to embody. Imagine tuning a radio to receive a specific frequency, then pushing it off balance. The sound becomes static, garbled, indecipherable. This is what happens when spiritual figures are not given the spatial respect they require. The signal is disrupted, and with it, the flow of qi that those figures are designed to strengthen. In Buddhist tradition, the physical act of placing a Buddha image is itself a ritual of intention. One does not place the statue while distracted or rushed. One selects a position with calm deliberation, often above head height when seated, always above waist height when standing, and ideally with a solid wall behind it for energetic support. The statue is oriented to face open space, never confined or turned toward a bathroom, bedroom, or chaotic zone. In many temples, even the offering table in front of a Buddha statue must be symmetrical and balanced. This isn't out of obsessive decorum, but because harmony in outer form reinforces harmony in energetic function. If the altar is uneven, the practitioner's mind is often distracted. If the statue is crooked, the alignment of intention is compromised. These principles, when applied at home, create an energetic boundary, a zone of spiritual clarity that subtly radiates through the entire space. And when that boundary is broken through careless placement, the home begins to lose its anchor. Those living within it may experience a loss of direction, emotional volatility, or a sense of something missing, especially in areas tied to wealth, purpose, or inner peace. There's also a karmic layer to this discussion. In Buddhist cosmology, every object we interact with leaves an imprint, not only on our environment but on our consciousness. When we honor sacred figures with cleanliness, elevation, and stillness, we cultivate respect not just externally but within. When we neglect them, we condition ourselves towards spiritual laziness or unconscious disrespect. This karmic pattern then replicates in other parts of our life. We may start to see opportunities left unattended, relationships left unappreciated, or goals left unfulfilled, not due to misfortune, but because our orientation to sacred responsibility has become skewed. To correct this is simple, yet profound. Begin by locating every statue in your home that holds spiritual or energetic value. Observe how it is placed. Is it facing a wall? Is it covered in dust? Is it too low, near the floor, or in a high-traffic area where people pass with indifference? If so, lift it. Clean it with intention. Use a soft cloth dipped in clean water infused with basil, sandalwood, or lemongrass. Speak a quiet affirmation. May this space honor your presence. May your presence bring peace. Offerings need not be elaborate. A small glass of fresh water changed daily, a stick of sandalwood incense, or a tea light candle lit in the evening are enough. These gestures are not religious requirements. They are energetic reminders. They signal your willingness to engage with the unseen world that quietly shapes your lived experience. For wealth-related statues, placement is particularly critical. These figures should be positioned in the southeast corner of your living room or office, the traditional wealth sector in feng shui. They should never face the entrance directly, as this signals wealth being guarded rather than welcomed. They should never be placed on the ground or near sharp edges, trash bins, or clutter zones, which symbolically diminish their authority and weaken their influence. Instead, place them on wooden shelves with solid back support and open space in front. If possible, light the area with warm lighting to activate yang energy. Flank the statue with symbols of growth, such as bamboo, jade stones, or coins tied in red string. These serve as energetic assistants, reinforcing the figure's function and echoing the message. Abundance is protected, welcomed, and respected here. Some homeowners also integrate mantras or written affirmations near these statues, not as decoration, but as vibrational cues. A frame print of Om Mani Padme Hum or a handwritten phrase like, "Gratitude is my wealth," acts as an energetic amplifier. Just as a well-placed antenna strengthens reception, a well-anchored intention strengthens manifestation. Remember that misalignment is not just spatial, it's a posture of consciousness. When you neglect the sacred, you teach your environment to ignore your intentions. When you elevate the sacred, even with something as simple as adjusting a statue's direction, You teach your environment to respond, and in time, it does. Clients who have realigned their sacred objects often report a cascade of subtle shifts: greater peace during meditation, improved family communication, better sleep, and financial gains that seem to flow more smoothly. These are not accidents. They are reflections of a rebalanced energetic ecosystem, one where the sacred is not merely displayed, but integrated. As a final reflection, the question is not, do you have a Buddha statue in your home? But is that statue aligned with the life you want to live? If it sits forgotten, crooked, or buried in noise, then perhaps that reflects the state of your current focus. But if it stands tall, still and clear, then perhaps you are more ready than you realize to receive the guidance, protection, and prosperity it has always been waiting to offer. Family photos or ancestral altars. Disconnected lineage. In every culture that reveres tradition, ancestry is not merely history, it is energy. The photographs of those who came before us, the small altars tucked into corners of homes, the incense smoke that rises toward their memory, all of it functions not just as remembrance, but as transmission. Our ancestors are not gone. They are carried forward through memory, ritual, and intention. And in the spatial wisdom of feng shui and the metaphysical understanding of Buddhism, these connections are bridges, energetic threads that stabilize identity, guide karma, and nurture emotional coherence across generations. When these threads are honored and aligned, they create a foundation of strength. When they are ignored, distorted, or placed carelessly, the result is not simply visual imbalance, it becomes spiritual and emotional disconnection. Consider the typical modern home. Family photos may be scattered throughout the space, some framed and mounted, others left leaning on crowded bookshelves, a few half hidden in drawers. Ancestral altars, if present, are often squeezed into utility corners, behind doors, or placed next to clutter. None of this is done with malice. It is simply the result of modern busyness, of forgetting that memory requires care to remain alive. But in the energetic landscape of a home, these forgotten details accumulate meaning. In feng shui, the placement of ancestral photos is treated with the same gravity as the placement of wealth objects or sacred statues. Each frame holds a thread, and if those threads are misaligned, crooked, dusty, neglected, placed too low or beside items of mundane or even toxic energy, then the bridge they are meant to form between past and present begins to twist. This distortion has real-life consequences. Relationships between siblings may grow strained without cause. A home that once felt warm becomes inexplicably tense. Young children may exhibit signs of rootlessness, restlessness, or behavioral confusion. The elders may grow distant or feel unheard. These symptoms are not caused by the photos themselves, but by the broken channel they represent when not properly respected. Buddhist teachings go even deeper. In many lineages, honoring one's parents and grandparents is not just ethical, it is karmic. Our bodies come from them. Our habits are shaped by them. Their unhealed wounds ripple into our lives unless we consciously address them. This is why the act of honoring ancestors through incense, prayer, or even a silent bow is believed to stabilize family karma. It soothes energetic debts, repairs emotional fractures, and offers clarity to the present by acknowledging the unseen weight of the past. Ancestral altars in Buddhist homes are never placed below the waist. They are never crowded between televisions, refrigerators, or exposed to toilets or sharp corners. Instead, they are elevated, often on dedicated shelves or recessed niches, with clean white cloths, fresh water, and candles. Photographs are aligned carefully, not to create perfection, but to mirror harmony. No frame leans, no face is obscured. The altar is not for show, it is a space of relational truth. Even in homes that do not maintain full altars, the respectful placement of family photos can carry the same energy. When arranged with intention, above seated eye level, dusted weekly, and placed in cohesive frames, they begin to emit a stabilizing current. They remind the household that we are not islands, we are continuums. Even a single black and white photo of a grandparent, displayed respectfully in a quiet corner with a candle or small flower nearby, can anchor the chi of an entire room. The absence of this anchoring is equally powerful. Homes that lack visible ancestry often begin to float in meaning. Decisions become impulsive. Emotional resilience weakens. Generational patterns begin to repeat themselves blindly because the lessons of the past are not being integrated. A photo gathering dust behind a sofa becomes a symbol of lessons left unlearned. A warped frame left leaning in the hallway reflects a bridge between generations bending under strain. In the same way that clutter reflects indecision, neglected memory reflects unresolved lineage. Reclaiming this space is not difficult, but it requires care. Begin by gathering the photographs of your elders, parents, grandparents, even relatives who passed young but left an emotional impact. Clean the frames. Replace damaged ones. Choose a single space, preferably on a wall that does not face a bathroom or staircase, and create a modest gallery of memory. Arrange them symmetrically if possible with at least one candle, a white or gold cloth, or a natural element like a small plant or bowl of rice nearby. You are not constructing a shrine, you are building a bridge. If you already have an ancestral altar, renew its vitality. Remove expired offerings. Light fresh incense. Speak aloud the names of your ancestors, not for them to hear, but for your own memory to remember. This act alone grounds you in the energy of continuity. Even if you know little of your family history, the gesture still carries weight. Energy responds not just to accuracy, but to intent. In cases of estrangement, abuse, or trauma, ancestral honoring can be reimagined, not to glorify pain, but to release it. In Buddhist psychology, offering peace to one's ancestors is also a way of healing the inner child. The photo does not represent who they were at their worst. It represents the karmic thread that brought you into being. Elevating that image allows you to take ownership of your narrative, not by forgetting the past, but by placing it in a position where it no longer governs you unconsciously. In Feng Shui, the ideal location for ancestral images or altars is in the living room, study, or hallway. Anywhere that energy flows gently and where moments of reflection naturally occur. Avoid placing them in bedrooms, especially near the foot of the bed, as this may invite over-identification or subconscious interference during sleep. Do not place them too close to high traffic or noisy zones. These areas scatter chi and prevent deep energetic rooting. Respect does not require extravagance. It requires clarity. One aligned photo placed above sitting eye level, dust-free and centered, carries more power than a dozen chaotic frames lost in decorative clutter. And that one photo, when aligned, often marks the beginning of surprising shifts. A long-lost cousin reaching out, a long-standing family conflict softening, or an unexpected sense of inner belonging rising from within. These are the echoes of a reconnected lineage. They are not miracles, they are the natural result of placing what matters in its rightful place. Because when the past is honored, the present stabilizes. And when the present is clear, the future becomes possible. Pillows and bed linens. Disrupted rest equals disrupted mind. In the sacred language of space, few places speak more directly to the soul than the bed. It is the altar of the body, the cradle of the mind, and the hidden temple where healing, dreaming, and psychic integration occur. Every night, whether or not we are aware of it, we return to this intimate environment not only to rest our muscles, but to restore the very essence of who we are. Sleep, in both Feng Shui and Buddhist understanding, is not merely the unconscious time. It is a period of active rebalancing. During this time, our physical energies reorient, our emotional stress dissolves layer by layer, and our karmic impressions gently sort themselves out like waves settling on a still lake. But for this sacred reorganization to occur with efficiency and peace, the environment in which we sleep must mirror stillness, softness, and order. When the bedroom, particularly the bed, is misaligned, cluttered, or neglected, the body senses it before the conscious mind does. It registers that the space of healing is no longer safe or clean or whole, and in response, it resists surrender. This resistance, although subtle, has real consequences. It may appear as fragmented sleep, difficulty falling asleep, shallow breathing during the night, or dreams that stir unease rather than resolve it. Over time, the effects of disrupted rest ripple outward into irritability during the day, weakened decision-making, physical fatigue that resists caffeine or exercise, and a pervasive sense of mental fog that refuses to lift. The culprit behind this slow unraveling is often hiding in plain sight. Misaligned pillows, untended linens, and disorder in the energetic layout of the bed. In Feng Shui, the bed is considered the single most important piece of furniture in the home. It is not just a mattress, it is the energetic center of yin restoration. It is the magnet that draws qi inward, allowing the individual to recharge so that they may act decisively in the world. And within this setting, pillows play a role far beyond mere comfort. A pillow is the throne of the head, the seat of thought, breath, and dreams. It cradles the gateway between waking and sleeping life. When a pillow is lopsided, flattened, overly elevated, or tossed around without care, it disturbs the flow of energy around the crown of the head. According to Buddhist energetics and traditional Chinese medicine, this is the center where spirit and clarity converge. To neglect its support is to invite spiritual dissonance. Furthermore, when pillows are arranged without symmetry, one pillow pushed up, the other sagging, a third falling behind the bed frame, it creates symbolic discord. Feng Shui teaches that symmetry in bed arrangements invites harmony in relationships, clarity in thought, and balanced emotional processing during sleep. Misalignment, on the other hand, fosters subconscious tension. One begins to carry this tension into waking life, emotional disarray, difficulty concentrating, subtle impatience with loved ones. These are not imagined patterns. They are reflections of a sleep space that no longer reflects wholeness. The condition of the linens compounds this effect. Sheets that are wrinkled, stained, mismatched, or left unmade communicate disarray to the nervous system. The body, upon entering such a bed, does not exhale fully. It tenses, it hesitates. Even if the conscious mind is willing to sleep, the deeper energetic layers are bracing rather than relaxing. Buddhist teachings describe sleep as one of the 4 essential forms of right effort. It is not laziness, it is purification. The mind needs this time to reorganize karmic impressions, resolve psychic fragments, and reestablish equilibrium. When the external symbols of that process, pillows and linens, are in disharmony, the purification process is slowed or disrupted. The result is a mind that remains agitated even after 8 hours of unconsciousness. To restore balance, one must begin not with expensive bed sheets or high-end decor, but with daily acts of sacred alignment. Straighten your bed each morning, not as a chore, but as a quiet ritual. It takes less than 2 minutes, yet it affirms the value you place on your own recovery. Smooth the linens with the palms of your hands, affirming mentally, may this space restore me, may rest be whole. Fluff the pillows with presence. If you sleep with a partner, Align both pillows symmetrically as a silent gesture of unity. Even if they are not there, the energy of invitation remains. If your bed holds more than 2 pillows, be mindful of how they are arranged. Avoid pillow clutter. Each item should have a purpose, either energetic or functional. Decorative pillows that serve no purpose and crowd the sleeping space should be reconsidered. Less is often more when it comes to spiritual clarity. Invest, when possible, in bed linens that reflect peace. This doesn't mean expensive materials, but fabrics that breathe, colors that soothe, and textures that encourage softness. In feng shui, colors like light beige, pale blue, muted jade, and ivory are favored for bedroom spaces. They reflect the elements of earth and water, inviting stillness and emotional renewal. Avoid red, black, or highly stimulating patterns in your pillowcases or bedspread. These can invite too much yang energy and disturb sleep cycles. Clean your linens regularly, not only for hygiene, but to maintain energetic freshness. Sheets that carry the dust and tension of previous nights eventually become fields of stagnation. Changing your linens, especially after a stressful week, can be as spiritually effective as a deep meditation. It symbolically wipes the karmic slate clean. You begin again, renewed. For those with deeper spiritual practices, the bed can also become a micro-altar for subconscious healing. Before sleep, you may place a small amulet, mala, or calming stone beneath your pillow, not for superstition, but to anchor your intention. Speak a short phrase silently. May tonight bring an integration. May I return to wholeness. You may also consider facing your bed so that your head rests toward one of your auspicious directions based on your Kua number, a common technique in classical feng shui to maximize restfulness in life alignment. But above all else, remember that sacred sleep begins with respect. The way you prepare your bed reflects how seriously you take your own restoration. A disheveled pillow is not just an aesthetic slip. It is a message to your subconscious that you do not prioritize your peace, and the subconscious listens. A straightened bed, on the other hand, says, I matter. My healing matters. My peace is worthy of preparation. And when your body hears that message, night after night, it begins to believe it. Over time, the impact becomes visible. Better focus, more emotional resilience, fewer reactive moments, deeper sleep, and dreams that do not confuse but guide. All of this born not from complexity, but from simplicity done with care. So tonight, before you lay your head to rest, take one quiet minute to align your space. Straighten the sheets, center the pillows. Let the physical space mirror the peace you wish to carry. In doing so, you transform your bed into something more than furniture. You turn it into a sanctuary, and in that sanctuary, the body remembers how to heal, the mind remembers how to let go, and the soul remembers what it feels like to be home. Glass cups and teacups. Inverted luck. In the quiet choreography of a home's energy, few objects speak more subtly about a household's relationship with flow, nourishment, and emotional openness than the everyday cup. Whether made of glass, porcelain, clay, or fine crystal, a cup is never just a container. It is a symbol of receptivity. It stands ready to receive. And in feng shui, that readiness is sacred. The moment a cup is turned upside down, particularly in storage or display, it ceases to be a vessel and becomes instead a barrier. The open mouth of the cup, designed to welcome water, tea, or warmth, becomes sealed. Its invitation is withdrawn. It says not I am available, but I am closed. This single gesture, repeated unconsciously across households and kitchens, can disrupt a home's energetic ecology in ways most people would never think to consider. In feng shui, qi, or life energy, does not just flow aimlessly. It seeks receptacles. It looks for places to settle and nourish. It lingers where intention has created space. A cup, when placed upright, acts as one such anchor. It is a subtle affirmation to the universe. Here there is space to receive. Here we are open to abundance, hydration, emotional warmth, communion. A turn cup, on the other hand, is a quiet refusal. It sends the message that receptivity is not welcome, that nourishment is not needed, that flow is unwelcome. Multiply this message across every cup in a cabinet, particularly near water sources like the kitchen sink, tea station, or filtered water dispenser, and you begin to understand the energetic dissonance it creates. Water, in both Feng Shui and Buddhist philosophy, is a symbol of prosperity, emotion, adaptability, and spiritual purification. In a home, it is not enough to have water. It must also have a vessel into which it can be poured. To store all cups and glasses upside down near water zones is to surround that vital source with inverted signals. You've made the energy available but denied it a place to land. Symbolically, this might begin to show up in the household as emotional numbness, a decrease in joy around shared meals or conversations, even a lack of financial momentum despite effort. One might feel dry despite effort, unrecognized despite action, or strangely unsupported by others. These manifestations do not emerge from the cups themselves, but from the consistent pattern they reflect, the unconscious refusal to stay open. In Buddhist practice, the cup is a metaphor for the mind. A beginner's mind is like an empty cup, ready to be filled, unburdened by preconceived notions. The great Zen master Shunryu Suzuki once said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few." But if the cup is turned upside down, not only is it unable to receive, it cannot even acknowledge what it's missing. In this sense, storing teacups upside down, even if done out of habit or to keep dust out, becomes a gesture that unconsciously trains the psyche to stay closed. It prioritizes defense over receptivity, control over openness. In contrast, the simple act of storing cups upright, even in a closed cabinet, becomes a daily ritual of readiness. It says, "I am prepared to be nourished. I trust that life will fill me." In many tea cultures, including Japanese and Vietnamese traditions, the handling of the teacup is an extension of one's internal state. To offer tea to another is to share qi. To place the cup gently, upright, and with two hands is an offering not just of liquid, but of mindfulness. In Cha Dao, the Chinese way of tea, the entire ceremony revolves around the respect given to the cup. Never is it slapped down or carelessly flipped. It is held, cleaned, placed, and rotated with reverence. This is not performance, it is practice, a reflection of one's willingness to create space for stillness, connection, and spiritual hydration. In the modern home, the opportunity for such mindfulness may not come through formal tea rituals, but it comes in the quiet moment of closing a cabinet. Do you stack the cups thoughtlessly upside down to fit more efficiently? Or do you place them upright, allowing them to remain open? Do you leave used glasses on tables half filled for hours? Or do you return them to the sink, cleanse them, and restore them to their place of receptivity? These acts are mundane, but in the metaphysical life, the mundane is where meaning resides. To cultivate a home that receives fortune, love, and health, you must first cultivate objects that receive. The cup becomes a symbol of this orientation. For those who maintain tea stations, coffee corners, or even water filtration systems in their homes, the surrounding energy is amplified by how cups are treated. If the cups are upright, clean, and intentional, the water becomes more than a drink. It becomes a carrier of qi. Tea made in such a setting tastes different. Water drunk in such a corner just feels more restorative. This is not magic, it is coherence, a physical reflection of spiritual openness. To begin shifting the energy of your home, try this. Open your cabinets and examine how your cups are stored. If they are upside down, ask yourself why. Is it to save space? Out of habit? Out of fear of dust or spillage or disorder? Then consider this: what are you actually protecting? Is the trade-off worth the energetic message of refusal? Try turning a few upright, especially those used regularly. Wipe their interiors clean. Say silently, "I am ready to receive." Then notice over the next few days if anything shifts. Not dramatically, but subtly. Do conversations feel more easeful? Does tea taste warmer? Do you feel, without knowing why, just a little more open to possibility? These are the clues that your environment is listening. Over time, this small gesture of turning cups upright becomes a deeper habit. You may begin to notice other forms of inverted receptivity in your life. Saying no reflexively to help, over-explaining your needs, hesitating to express vulnerability. These habits mirror the energy of the closed cup. As you realign the outer symbol, the inner posture begins to follow. And as the inner posture shifts, life begins to pour again. In one Buddhist temple in northern Thailand, it is customary to place a single ceramic cup on the altar each morning. Empty, upright, gleaming. No water is poured into it. No monk drinks from it. It simply sits, waiting. The head monk once said, "This cup reminds us that the gods cannot pour anything into hands that are already closed." You don't need gods to pour into your life. Life itself is always pouring. The question is, are you turned in a direction that can receive it? How a billionaire's habit changed his energy flow. In the polished heart of Hangzhou, where tradition threads through skyscrapers and modern innovation pulses through alleyways steeped in ancestral dust, one man built a digital empire that reshaped not only the Chinese economy, but the way billions of people interact with commerce itself. Jack Ma, founder of Alibaba, is often remembered for his entrepreneurial eccentricity, his inspirational speeches, his wit, and his unwavering belief in possibility. But behind the charisma, there is another trait that fewer speak of: his reverence for energetic order. While much of the world focused on his business forecasts and IPO headlines, Ma quietly consulted the unseen layers of existence. He did not shout about it. He never framed it as mysticism. Instead, he treated it as alignment. In several lesser-known interviews and conversations shared with associates, Ma described how, early in his career, he began to notice the effect his surroundings had on his clarity. "A messy desk creates a messy mind," he said, not as a catchy phrase, but as a quiet rule. He would sit at his desk and observe how certain objects, when placed without care, would cause subtle agitation. Papers piled randomly felt like decisions left unresolved. A pen angled toward him at a sharp slant felt like pressure. Gifts from visiting dignitaries or clients, especially symbolic items like cranes, stones, or dragon figurines, were not scattered as decoration, but placed intentionally based on their material, color, and origin. These were not decorations, they were energies. And energy to Ma was something one either worked with or was disrupted by. When he first moved into Alibaba's now famous Hangzhou headquarters, the building was sleek, modern, glass-lined, and industrially efficient. But Ma, walking through its halls, felt something was off. He later invited several feng shui consultants to assess the space. Their observations confirmed what he had intuitively sensed. Certain meeting rooms faced structural angles that projected cutting qi, or sha qi, sharp, aggressive energy that unsettles flow and can lead to tension in communication. His personal office was aligned with a corridor that, while functional, funneled stagnant energy straight toward his desk. The consultants offered practical adjustments. Reorient the desk slightly so that Ma's back was supported by a solid wall. Place a small leafy plant between the door and the desk to soften direct incoming qi. Shift the storage cabinets that created unbalanced visual weight on the left side of the room, and avoid stacking used teacups or unfinished folders in the southwest corner, the energy center associated with relationships and decision-making. Ma followed their advice, not because he blindly believed in tradition, but because he believed in clarity. And clarity, he knew, was not just about thoughts, it was about surroundings. He changed his desk position slightly. He removed the ornamental sword that had once been gifted by a dignitary, and now, when viewed from his seat, pointed toward his abdomen like a silent threat. He replaced it with a calligraphy scroll that read, Ne Anwai Shun, inner peace, outer flow. He stopped stacking papers beside his tea tray. He asked his assistant to ensure the water dispenser was always kept full and the cups placed upright, not just rinsed but polished. Each morning when he arrived before his team, he would touch each item, his brush, his pen, his cup, not out of compulsion, but as a subtle grounding practice. Everything had its place. Everything had to feel settled. These changes did not produce lightning strikes of fortune. There was no lottery win, no sudden windfall. What changed was rhythm, flow. Conversations became easier, negotiations more fluid. Meetings that once veered into argumentative turns found common language. He felt, in his words, more able to see ahead. And when asked whether these actions were driven by superstition, he smiled and said, I don't believe in ghosts, I believe in signals. When space signals chaos, how can the mind remain clear? This is the essence of how energy and form co-create fate, not in drama, but in detail. Ma did not hang red tassels from the ceiling or place laughing Buddhas in every room. He used space the way a conductor uses a baton to guide unseen rhythm. And through that rhythm, his mind became sharper, his vision more coherent, and his leadership more impactful. This is not a billionaire's luxury. This is a universal invitation. Whether your office is a corporate corner or a small kitchen table, your space speaks, and it listens. When you place your objects carelessly, cups stacked upside down, papers littered with no narrative, photos leaning against printer cords, you are sending unconscious instructions to your environment. Confusion is welcome here. When you adjust, when you place your chair with a supportive back, your tools with intention, your cups upright, your pathways clear, you invite coherence. You invite ease. You may not notice the effect immediately, but over time your choices echo. They accumulate. Like water carving stone, they shape your trajectory. Jack Ma's genius was not that he believed in magic. It was that he understood alignment. That small acts of precision, where the pen lies, which direction the light falls, how a chair faces the door, can create ripple effects in business, in thought, and in destiny. So ask yourself, is your desk arranged for speed or for flow? And are the objects around you there by design or by default? Do your belongings support your intention or distract from it? When we speak of feng shui, we are not speaking of luck charms and myth. We are speaking of the human ability to shape space in the service of clarity. We are speaking of honoring the unseen structures that help us hold our dreams steady. When Ma chose to reorient his desk, he was not bowing to superstition. He was making space for his highest function to emerge. That is not mysticism, that is wisdom. And so whether or not you ever lead a global company or speak on world stages, you have a space right now, a room, a desk, a corner of a room that reflects who you are and where you're going. It's not about size, it's about signal, it's about alignment. It's about the silent dialogue between your external arrangement and your internal architecture. You don't need a feng shui master to start, you need attention. You need care. You need a willingness to rearrange what you've tolerated. The space around you is already responding to your choices. The question is, what are you asking it to echo? How to cleanse after correcting? Resetting the flow. There is a quiet moment after every shift, a pause after the rearrangement of space when the air feels different, not just lighter but uncertain, as though the energy itself is asking, now what? This is the threshold, the in-between space where old energetic patterns have been disrupted, but the new frequency has not yet fully arrived. In Feng Shui and Buddhist ritual alike, this is not the end of the process. It is its most delicate point. Like soil that has just been tilled, the energetic environment is open, porous, and sensitive. Whatever enters now, sound, scent, intention, will set the tone for what grows next. And this is where cleansing becomes not just advisable, but essential. Correcting misalignments, flipped objects, slanted statues, disoriented photos, downward mirrors, is the architectural work of energy. But cleansing is the ritual. It is the breath that follows the movement, the incense that settles after the storm, the answer to the silent question, am I ready to welcome something new? The first act is simple yet profound. Open the windows. This is more than ventilation, it is invitation. In Buddhist temples, windows are often opened before morning chanting, not just to let in air, but to allow fresh qi to enter. In your home, this same act resets the room's energetic pulse. Whether it's the stillness of dawn or the brightness of midday, open the windows wide. Let the breeze, even if faint, sweep through every crevice of the corrected area. As the air moves, it carries with it the stagnant residues that clung to the space before you made the shift. It whispers to the walls, the old pattern has passed. A new breath is here. Leave the windows open for at least 20 minutes, ideally longer if weather permits. Let the natural world participate in the reset. Let the wind remind your home that it is not sealed from life, but connected to it. Once the space has inhaled the new air, it's time to reweave intention into the room. Light incense, choose sandalwood if your space needs grounding, or agar wood if you seek spiritual elevation. These two woods have been used for centuries in both Buddhist and Taoist purification rituals. Sandalwood clears confusion and stabilizes earth energy. Agar wood penetrates illusion and calls the higher self into awareness. Light the stick slowly, watch the flame flicker, and then die down, leaving only smoke. As the fragrance curls into the room, do not rush. Let your breath align with it. You may now recite a verse, not loudly but gently, as if sharing a secret with the air itself. If you know the Heart Sutra, its cadence is ideal. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. If not, a simple Buddhist gatha will suffice. Breathing in, I calm my body. Breathing out, I smile. Dwelling in the present moment, I know this is a wonderful moment. Repeat the verse as you walk clockwise around the corrected space, holding the incense in your dominant hand. Let the smoke pass over the object you have reoriented. The mirror now upright, the statue now elevated, the pillows now aligned. Let the sound of the verse braid with the smoke and stitch peace into the room's atmosphere. This is not about recitation. It is about resonance. You are reminding the space and yourself that clarity is not an accident. It is a decision. After the auditory and aromatic cleansing, the third step is physical touch. This is where you meet the space with your hands. Prepare a cleansing solution using ingredients both ancient and accessible. Garlic, ginger, and soapberry. Garlic, with its pungent heat, repels lingering negativity. Ginger activates warmth and yang energy. Soapberry, used for centuries in natural cleansing traditions across Asia, lifts both physical and subtle grime. Combine these three in warm water. Let it steep for a few moments. Then dip a clean cloth or sponge into the mixture and gently wipe down the area you've just corrected. If it was a flip-out bowl, wipe the surface and surrounding shelf. If it was a misdirected mirror, cleanse not just the glass but the frame. If it was a disrespected statue, wipe the platform, the floor beneath, and even the air around it. Move slowly, move intentionally. This is the act of sealing the correction, of saying this space has been touched by consciousness. As you wipe, you may again repeat a short phrase. May this space receive only blessings. May what was blocked now flow. The physical contact reinforces the energetic reset. In Buddhist temple maintenance, this step is never skipped. Every altar, every incense holder, every statue is wiped with intention, not just cleanliness. The hands transmit what words cannot. Your hands right now are the hands of restoration. Finally, introduce a living or activating element into the space. A yang catalyst that ensures the new energy doesn't just settle, but thrives. In feng shui, this can take several forms. A money plant, Pachira aquatica, known for its braided trunk and rounded leaves, is ideal for spaces where abundance and opportunity are being welcomed. Its presence near water or wealth corners reinforces growth and receptivity. Place it near the area you corrected, not blocking pathways, but close enough to participate in the new flow. Alternatively, hang a gentle wind chime, preferably made of wood or brass, where it will catch soft movement. Sound in feng shui reactivates energy pockets that might otherwise become stale. A chime is not noise, it is music made by wind. It calls joy to linger. For spaces tied to clarity, decision-making, or healing, consider placing a piece of clear quartz nearby. This crystal does not have to be large or dramatic. Even a palm-sized cluster, when placed with care, amplifies clarity and keeps spiritual static at bay. Clear quartz is known as the master stone, a neutral transmitter that enhances whatever intention it is near. Let it sit quietly on a shelf or near the corrected object, like a silent guardian of the space's new order. This four-step process, air, smoke, cleansing, activation, is a ritual of profound recalibration. You have not only corrected the outer form, you have retrained the energy. You have signaled to your environment that you are aware, intentional, and ready to relate with space as a partner. And space, once acknowledged, responds. The mirror reflects with softness. The bowl, now upright, becomes a vessel again. The photos glow with steadiness. The statue emanates calm. Over the next days, you may find yourself standing in the corrected room with a sense of ease you didn't expect. You may notice fewer arguments, clearer thoughts, more restful sleep. These are not accidents. They are echoes of your care. Because when you restore flow with presence, the universe doesn't just witness it, it moves with you. That is the essence of sacred alignment, not superstition, not ritual for ritual's sake, but a return to resonance. A reminder that energy is always listening and that you, simply by rearranging, cleansing, and blessing your space, have begun to speak a new language, one of harmony, clarity, and quiet power. By now, you may have walked through your home in your mind. You may have remembered a tilted frame on your shelf, a dusty photo of an ancestor leaning behind your router, a bowl resting upside down in the back of your cabinet, or a statue whose placement you hadn't questioned in years. Maybe it made you curious. Maybe it made you pause. But more than anything, perhaps it brought you into deeper awareness. That's the entire point. Because in both feng shui and Buddhism, perfection is never the goal. The idea that every item must be symmetrically aligned, color-coded, or arranged with mathematical precision is not the wisdom we follow. Instead, we are guided by harmony, flow, rhythm, the soft dialogue between the spaces we create and the lives we are quietly trying to live. In Buddhist teachings, nothing is permanent. Nothing is rigid. Everything is in motion: breath, thought, relationship, purpose. Mistakes will happen, dust will return, an object will shift slightly over time. That's not failure, that's life. What matters is whether we see it, whether we respond to it, whether we recognize that space, just like consciousness, requires presence. That's why feng shui is not about control, it's about communication. Every object you place sends a signal, not to some mysterious force, but to your own mind, your own energy field, your own future. A flippant bowl is not just an oversight, it's a whisper of your relationship to receptivity. A downward mirror may reflect nothing and yet still shape how you see yourself. A misaligned photo of your grandparents may not change the past, but it can subtly shift how you carry their memory into the present. When you begin to place objects with awareness, something beautiful happens. Your environment starts to mirror your intention. Your home becomes not just a structure you live in, but a quiet partner in your healing, your growth, your becoming. And the best part? You don't need expensive things. You don't need imported crystals or high-end decor. You don't need to turn your living room into a temple. You just need to pay attention. You need to care. You need to respect the life you're building by respecting the space that holds it. There's a Buddhist teaching that says, when the mind is ready, the path appears. But readiness isn't only about mental preparation. It's about alignment. It's about putting your outer world in agreement with your inner values. When you sit at a desk that feels steady, when you drink tea from a cup placed with intention, when you lay your head on a pillow that's been lovingly aligned, you are telling the universe, in 1,000 quiet ways, I am ready. That readiness, spoken not in words but in form, is what attracts flow. Not through force, not through manipulation, but through coherence. The inside and the outside start to sing the same song. And in that resonance, prosperity finds its way to your door. Not because you chased it, but because your space became a signal that said, welcome. So if all you do today is walk into your kitchen and turn a bowl upright, you've already shifted something. If all you do is dust a photo and realign it, you've honored memory. If you clear the bristles of your broom and store it respectfully, you have already released stagnant energy. These are small things, but in the language of space, they speak loudly. As one of my favorite phrases reminds us, a flippant bowl may seem small, but in the language of energy, it shouts. When your space whispers in the right direction, fortune listens. If this video gave you a new lens to see your home, I warmly invite you to share it with someone who may also be looking for more clarity, more peace, or simply a better flow to their days. Leave a comment. Tell me what shifted for you or what you feel inspired to realign. And if you'd like to walk this journey together, I would be honored if you subscribe to New Day Mindfulness. Your support helps this small corner of wisdom reach more hearts and helps me get closer to the next milestone of 2,000 followers, so I can continue offering content that's both practical and deeply grounded. Thank you for being here, for listening, for seeing. May your space speak clearly, and may your life respond with grace.